Obviously, we have a system of instruction. We've covered system. System is an organized plan. System is a number of routines that are repeated. To be a systematic coach, to have set methodology. I just wrote down a few things. Certainly, we don't have a system of self-discovery. We want to be careful not to say that we have a command style. Do this, do this, do this, do this. When it comes down to players that learn totally through self-discovery, one thing is we don't really have players that develop unorthodox strokes. If you were to look at someone like Monica Seles, who was so great with her two-handed forehand, and at one time they tried to change her two-handed forehand to a one-handed forehand, and if she was taught systematically, she would not have had her unorthodox forehand that she self-discovered really on her own. And I do think that what you want to do is become your own critic. To avoid criticism, say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. You don't want to be in a position where you say, well, your system is perfect. There's no such thing as perfection. When we have kids go out and they all know how to go through a drop hit routine, our coaches can become lazy because the program almost runs itself. That's a factor. One thing with a comment I made earlier is over-teaching. In some ways, there's some positives of not having information because you just go out and you work hard. You're just running side to side. You just get out there. You don't slow down. I have this down is that we have short-term setbacks. Granted, players can get worse before they get better when they make changes. I don't really think of that as a setback or a negative for the system. But I do think that through over-teaching, you can have poor fitness. That's really geared more towards the player because we end up spending an enormous amount of time on technique, and you have to find the balance. So when it comes down to negatives of a system, I think that you want to think in a negative manner, how can what we are doing be improved? And always be looking to do things differently. What I would consider for myself collector items is I have old films of people teaching tennis. And I'll use one example of Vic Braden teaching tennis in the 60s. And I have film of Braden teaching from the 60s, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even now in this decade. And it's amazing how much his tennis teaching has changed. But yet people will say the Vic Braden system, the Vic Braden method. Vic would be the first one to say, no, it's really the method of physical laws. So anyway, that's just a few thoughts. But on our side of it, even though there are negatives of the system, there's a much, much, much longer list of what the positives are for the system. I don't think people are getting value for their money. And then the track record for players who learn, quote unquote, through a trial and error approach. It's not a system, it's just trial and error approach. It's unfortunate how many of those players don't stay with the game because they get off to such a poor start, they don't stay with the sport.